brand new polling data suggests that Donald Trump is about to win the key swing state of Wisconsin. What is up, people of the internet? It is me, Real American, back again with a new video, and today we have to talk about the 2024 presidential election because it appears that Donald Trump's in a great position to win Wisconsin. Yeah, that's right. Despite what people claim about the current state of the race, Trump is in a great position to win Wisconsin. Now, does that mean he's gonna win the state by 15 points and it's a foregone conclusion? No. But right now, I believe Trump is the favorite to win Wisconsin. And there was a brand new poll released from Trafalgar just yesterday, and they found Trump +1. Now, people are gonna say, but it's Trafalgar. And I know Trafalgar, they have a very iffy. And that's because Trafalgar, they're a very inconsistent pollster. For whatever reason, it seems like when they post a poll, it's either going to be spot on or it's going to be off by like 15 points. That's Trafalgar in a nutshell. I don't know why that happens, but every time they post a poll, you have to be careful with it because sometimes it's correct. Like, not just correct, it's like perfect. And other times, it's off by like 5 to 20 points. Like it was back in 2022, like it was at some points back in 2018. That's Trafalgar. They're a very inconsistent pollster, but the big polling misses that Trafalgar has had in the past, they were in midterms. They were in 2018 and 2022. They weren't in 2016 and 2020. They were in lower turnout midterms, which for whatever reason, there's some pollsters like Trafalgar, they cannot pull a midterm for whatever reason. I don't know why, but they could pull a presidential election quite good. They are a pretty good pollster in presidential years, but for midterms, they suck. I'm not denying that at all. But in 2016 and 2020, they were spot on, especially in the Rust Belt. So when they dropped this Trump +1 out of Wisconsin, it was a pretty big deal because, well, it's Wisconsin. It's a key swing state. If Trump wins, more than likely, he's got the presidency. Because at that point, he's probably winning Pennsylvania. He's up in North Carolina. He's up in Georgia. At that point, he's got the presidency quite easily. He's going to win. And if he's up by 1 to 2 points like this poll suggests, you're talking about Trump possibly winning Michigan. He's up in Pennsylvania. That's more than enough to win the presidency. That's why it's a big deal. Now, like I said, when it comes to Trafalgar, you have to be careful. They can either be spot on or they suck. But I really believe they're going to be correct much more than other pollsters. And for those that don't believe me, back in 2020, their track record in Wisconsin was perfect. Like, look at this. Their final was Biden +1. He won the state by roughly a point. Yeah. Their poll before that, Biden +2. Their poll in late September, Biden +3. Yeah. So much for this idea that, oh, Trafalgar's such a bad pollster. They have no clue how to poll a state. That's bullshit. Trafalgar is a good pollster, especially in the Rust Belt, in presidential cycles. That's a fact. Hell, they actually understated Trump's support in early October and late September. Yeah, they claimed that he was going to lose Wisconsin by 2 to 3 points. He lost it by a point. There's so much of this idea that, oh, well, Trafalgar's a fake pollster. They have no clue what they're doing. Yeah, they had, I would say, really one bad cycle in 2022. 2018, they were hit or miss. But 2022, everyone could agree that was garbage. They did a bad job. I don't know what happened. I have no clue what happened with Trafalgar back in 22. But here's the thing, though. A midterm's not a presidential year. It's not. For crying out loud, the New York Times back in 2018, they weren't that bad. In fact, they were actually a good pollster back in 2018. But in 2020, they were one of the worst pollsters. What does that tell you, by the way? It tells you that the polls in midterms are not the same as presidential years. They're not. So you cannot directly compare a poll from 2022 to now. You just can't. They're two completely different cycles. They're different races. And Trafalgar, they struggle in off-year elections, but they're pretty good in presidential years. Now, if you go to the RCP average right now, it tells a slightly different story. It shows Harris with a small lead in Wisconsin. Like, it's Harris +1, which, that's not a big lead. Just like a Trump +1 in Wisconsin, on paper at least, it's not the biggest lead in the world. But people would say, well, look at the RCP average. Right now, it's Trump or Harris +1. Well, for starters, do people forget how bad polling in Wisconsin really is? Do we really have to go down this rabbit hole? Back in 2020, remember this? The final RCP average was Biden +7. Not +2, not +3, +7. And in early October, it was roughly Biden +6, +5, +5.5, +6. In October. Yeah. In 2016, look at this. In early October, Biden +5, or Clinton +5, +7, +6. At the very end, it was Clinton +7. I know it says Clinton +6.5, but we'll just round up. Clinton +7 was a final average in Wisconsin back in 2016. So this Harris +1, it's not that big of a lead. Far from it. You could argue it's actually a disaster for her, because if it's only Harris +1 in the RCP average, and let's just say, instead of a 6 to 7 point miss, it's only a 2-point miss. Right, let's say the RCP average, it's off by only 2 points, which at that point, that's a sampling error. That's statistical noise. That's nothing. Well, at that point, that's Trump +1. That would mean Trump is winning Wisconsin by 1 point. If it's off by just 2 points, not off by 6 or 7, off by just 2. Hell, even a 1-point miss. You're talking about Trump +0.2. So this Harris +1, for starters, is not a big lead for Wisconsin. In fact, it's a disaster. Especially compared to 2020 and 2016, the last 2 presidential years, there were huge polling misses in Wisconsin. I mean, Clinton +7, Biden +7. It's a joke, but either way, if it's a 2-point miss, it's Trump +1. If it's really a 6-point miss, which I'm not saying it's going to happen, well, at that point, you're talking about Trump +6 or 5 in Wisconsin. I'm not saying that's going to happen, but Wisconsin polling, they have a long history of having bad polling, especially for Republicans. Oh, Trump's going to lose Wisconsin by 6 to 7 points. He wins it by a point. This happens every year, especially in presidential years. Trump gets dramatically understated, but at the end of the day, it's either very close or he pulls off the upset. In Wisconsin, that's what happens every year. But not only that, ignore the average for a second. Does anyone notice something very strange about some of these polls? Is it just me, or are there 2 completely different polling universes? For those that don't understand what I'm talking about, look at half of these polls, and they found Harris up by 2 to 4 points. The other half, they found the race either tied or Trump with a lead. Yeah, so half the polls have a big Harris lead. The other half, they're finding Trump is up by, 1 to 2 points, maybe a bit more. Isn't that very strange? Because you can't have both. You can't have a Trump +2 and a Harris +4 at the same time. That's impossible. Like, fine, if it's a 1-point difference, that's one thing. But for it to be off by 6 points, that's the difference between the Trump polls and the Harris polls. It's not just a 1-point difference or a 2-point difference. You're talking about a 5 to 6 point gap between the Trump polls and the Harris polls. Which one's correct? I mean, that's what it comes down to. You have to decide which one is more accurate. Do you trust the Trump polls or do you trust the Harris polls? Well, in my opinion, you probably go with the Trump polls because, well, look back at 2020. The polls that have Harris with a lead, the same pollsters back in 2020, like the New York Times, they found it Biden +11. That's not a misquote. That's not a typo. Biden +11. Marquette, for which, by the way, people call it the gold standard, it's not. Marquette's not the gold standard of polling in Wisconsin. Like, they're better than the New York Times, but is that really saying much? For crying out loud, their final poll back in 2020 was Biden +5. And back in 2016, it was Clinton +6. So this idea that Marquette's the gold standard of polling in Wisconsin, that's bullshit. They're not that good of a pollster, and even in 2024, they changed their methodology completely. They're finding some very bizarre results, like Democrats, or I should say Harris, she is winning 99.9% of Democrats. Obviously, Harris is going to win the vast majority of Democrat voters, more than likely like 90 to 95%. But it's impossible for her to win 99% of Democrats. That's what the poll suggests. That has never happened in any presidential election. You always have like 5 to 10% of Democrats vote for the Republican, and vice versa. You have 5 to 10% of Republicans vote for the Democrat. This happens every year. But by some miracle, Kamala Harris is getting 99.9% of Democrats, according to Marquette. As for Bloomberg, everyone knows Bloomberg's a garbage pollster. It's Morning Consult. They don't know what the hell they're doing, and I think they're faking their numbers. I mean, every time there's a bad poll for Harris, out of the blue, Bloomberg drops a Harris +7 in Michigan, Harris +3 in Wisconsin. Every time. They've done this like 5 or 6 times this cycle. Every time there's a good poll for Trump, out of the blue, Harris +3 in Michigan, or I should say Wisconsin. Every time. Now, is it possible that the Harris leads are true? I guess. But who do you trust more? Trafalgar, Atlas Intel, Rasmussen, and Remington, and of course Emerson? Or do you trust the New York Times, Marquette, Cook Political Report, and Bloomberg? That's what it comes down to. Who do you trust more? Do you trust the Marquettes of the world, or do you trust the Trafalgars of the world? I know Trafalgar, they have a history of some bad polling misses, but in presidential years, especially in the Rust Belt, they know what they're doing. They are a pretty good pollster in presidential years in Wisconsin, in Michigan, in Pennsylvania. They know what they're doing, and they have a Trump +1, which is the same margin as Emerson with Trump +1. Atlas Intel has a Trump +2. Rasmussen, a tied race. Remington, a tied race. I would argue you would trust those polls way more than Marquette, the Cook Political Report, even the New York Times. Like, yeah, the New York Times, they have it Harris +2, but back in 2020, they were off by 10 points in Wisconsin. Not saying they're going to be off by 10 again, but if they're off by 3 points, 4, or even 5, that's half of what they were off by in 2020. That's a Trump +3. That's a Trump +2. Now, will that happen? Maybe not. I don't know, but you look at the current state of polling in Wisconsin, this is not that strong of a Harris lead. And the leads that Harris has from the Democrat pollsters, like Marquette, like Bloomberg, they are not the biggest leads for her at all. But we just got to see what happens. Maybe the Marquettes of the world, they're finally correct, and Trump's actually down by 4. We just got to see what happens, but these numbers are not good for Harris at all. Anyways, folks, thank you so much for watching. If you guys did enjoy this video, smash the like button down below, subscribe, share with your friends, hit that little bell, follow the social media accounts in the description down below, and of course, join the channel today. Godspeed to all of you.